With the calculations done, it's time for another episode of Throttle Stop Garage. In this week's episode, we're going to get started with a little bit of grinding. In this case, we're just buffing the MIG welds here on those lower control arm brackets, just getting those polished up and ready to get welded on. In other words, we've made progress. This was all filmed. Sorry about the date stamp on this. I forgot to take that off. But all filmed in December. Get ready for the winter boots, people. Here we are tacking those end plates on that lower control arm bracket. You can see I've just trying to make sure everything's in line, in the right place. Getting a few little tacks in, nothing big, nothing crazy, just a couple little tacks to hold them in place, making sure things are square, and getting ready then to mount the other part of that bracket to put it in double shear. So this is step number one. All right, while I was tacking these lower control arm brackets up, I thought I'd just take a minute and show you some of the fixturing. You've already hopefully just seen, had it on a stop motion there for a while, but I've now got I'll take my jig out, and I have these end plates in and they're aligned, so that's these plates here are in. I've just tacked them in 3 places around the edge. And now I'm in the process of putting on the plates that are just falling over there, so these ones. So the first thing I did is I took, again, machinist's 321 block or 123 block, whatever, and I've set a couple of screws on it, and I've set them up. Anyways, not a word of a lie, anyways, 56 millimeters is what I was shooting for. I guess I could stretch that down to 56. Close enough. So I've set both screws the same. Very carefully. This one looks like it's gone in just a hair, so back it out just a hair. Just a hair more. Too far. Sure doesn't take much. Okay, so close enough. So 56 millimeters is it seems to be a nice fit for that lower control arm. It's not too loose, it's not too tight. So what I'm going to do is put that block in here to space it off, set the other one up to it, and then square this bracket with this bracket, make sure it's square. We'll tack those in. And then actually we're going to mount the other suspension components to it before we do all the finish weld on all of this, which is, I guess, a little risky, but I think it's going to work out okay. At least I sure do hope it will. Anyway, let's get back to welding. Okay, so with those lower brackets all tacked up now and ready to go, I took them over to the sanding wheel of doom just to touch them up a little bit. I've cut those little locating tabs off of those brackets once they've served their purpose for locating that bracket. I didn't need them there anymore, and I didn't sort of want that look. So I'm now just grinding and finishing that part in on the bottom there to its sort of final shape and make sure that everything's touched up. I'm going to use that wheel again, but I forgot to turn the camera on for that part too. To remove the mill scale off of all the flat surfaces on these tubes and get them ready for finish welding. I don't mind tacking into that mill scale, but I don't want to weld in it. Normally I would have cleaned all that up in advance. I actually cover that in a bit of a laugh at myself in the video, but at any rate, you can see just how quickly that works. I believe to do a single side took 1 minute. Alright, so we're now just about done the first stage of cleaning of the parts. It's not that I forgot to do the insides. I really should have done them in advance, but I always had this little plan. So we just went in, we've cleaned most of this up, got rid of all the mill scale, any bits of rust. These parts were kind of rusty before. Well, a little bit of surface rust, usually the way they come actually. And then the mill scale, of course, you have to remove the mill scale in order for this to, in order for the welds to be nice, and you got to clean it up. And you really shouldn't be painting on this stuff anyways. It's not actually attached to the metal, so you paint on it. Sometimes you have to use etch primers and other things to get a bite into it. I prefer just to go clean with it, but it's a cold day here in Canada, so my idea before the weather got nasty was that I just throw these in my blast cabinet and blast them a little bit. Well, the problem is, here's the problem. Here's my blast cabinet. My blast cabinet usually sits in the outside shed, so I had to dig it out. Alright, so we're going to spend a few minutes in the blast cabinet. We'll get those all cleaned up and ready to go. The moment we've all been waiting for. We're about to actually weld, or at least tack it up. We're going to tack up most of this part of the frame. So anyway, last time when we left you, we were just trying to do some sandblasting. That was a total fail. It was quite funny actually. the pickup tube for the sandblast cabinet was so frozen that I had to bring it inside, and now it's clogging up all the space in my garage. The furnace is on. It's minus 34 degrees Celsius outside right now, and it's snowing. To add insult to injury, we got another, I don't know, 10, 12 centimeters last night, so lots of snow, lots of furnace on, lots of everything today, but we will show you how we made our jig. So I decided here, just to start in, I'll just give you a little zoom in on what we did, if I can get past the TIG torch. Okay, so I took my machinist 1, 2, 3 blocks again, bolted a couple of sets together, picked up the side and the top of the tube. So I've got a good corner here, another one here. I'm using the frame as the reference plane. In essence, I'm thinking of it as if it's the actual frame but flipped upside down. And that's the easiest way to build it. I actually designed these parts to be jigged in approximately this manner, so it's so far so good, because it's kind of hard to know. Again, we're going to complain and whine and moan about things being square, so it's hard to know what's square, it's hard to know what isn't square. It's difficult to have really accurate reference points for all of this stuff, so I basically have done the best that I can. I've installed the aluminum box section this time here. Again, it's reasonably straight. It's not perfect, but to the degree I can measure it, it's pretty good. I mean, I wish I had a milling machine so I could set it up and buzz the core surfaces and make sure it was perfectly straight. But then actually I'd want something a little bit thicker, right, to make sure it would sort of stay that way. But I've got the table squared. I actually jacked the table up a little bit so I get clamps and things positioned. Now I already clamped this in place. Of course, I've set this up God knows how many times now, just to make sure I'm not fooling myself. That's the worst of all mistakes I think that you can make when you're doing one of these builds, is you start believing any of the measurements that you take. It's really good to check and double check and try to figure out everything that you can measure and everything that you can possibly make right, make better. Whatever measurement you can do. Ask as many people as you can about what you could measure or should measure. So I've done the very best I can here. So I've squared everything. This is my reference plane. I found it very difficult again to be measuring to the bottom of the jig here. because it doesn't have a square corner like the aluminum does, and everything seems to be in the way. That's where the parts are. So I'm trying to measure the pickup points for the lower control arm. I'm not particularly concerned with some of the rest of the pieces. Again, I had to file these parts to make them right initially, so I've now sandblasted them. Obviously the cabinet is up and working this morning as we got everything out. You saw before how I welded those on, so they're about as perfect as I can make them, so they're nice and straight. I'm just using that bar as a straight line. It also gives me a surface to set the level on. I've cleaned all the material out, got a first grind on them, so they're starting to look like the actual part that'll go in. But I did have to file these upright pieces here so that they were not only perpendicular to this plate, but square to themselves. So I actually lost almost 50 thousandths of an inch of material off each side. So they're no longer 1.5 inches wide. So there's going to be a little bit of gap when we go to fit them up to the now clean parts, right? There's no more rusty metal, just that little bit of surface rust and slag and stuff that you always see on these parts. They don't fit, they're not bad. Again, this little bit that we're overhanging here is still, it's not causing me to lose sleep at this point, because I'll tack it in and it'll be just fine. I don't think it'll pull. My only other option is to come in and carefully grind back this end plate, but I don't actually think that's worth the trouble it would be to do it. Okay, so I set the blocks up again, taking one side as the reference side. This side here is just a hair, just ever so slightly off of this particular rail, so now we know something else for sure. That's not exactly perfect. So the tram bar again is being used, trammel. So I've set it into the end holes. I've set it into all the holes. I got time. It's Christmas time. Hey, so check that. Again, when you're using this, not that I'm an expert or anything on it, but what I'm trying to do is gauge the feel. Alright, so the tips have been ground to a point, and I'm just gauging the feel. It just goes straight into the hole without a concern in the world. It drops right into the tapered hole. So I set that in the same hole over here, falls into the hole exactly the same way. Like there isn't if you get it off just a hint, you get a little feel of it pulling. Again, a lot of this sort of measurement stuff when you're down into the weeds at this level, it's about feel. So that's a feel thing, right? It's sort of like using a caliper or a micrometer for the first time. Now, if a real machinist does it, they get it right every time. If you do it and you've never done it before, you're not exactly sure how to measure a round piece with it, because half of it's about the drag and the feel on that particular gauge. You're setting valves with a feeler gauge. It's like, feel. Well, I can tell you that feels exactly the same. It doesn't move. You don't get a sense of it touching. So it fits straight into the hole. So I'm convinced, to a fairly good degree, that this particular setup in here is square. So we've measured the diagonals. It's square. Nothing else it can be. So now we're going to start the process of assembling the other parts. So these are the parts I had laser cut. So the front part of the lower control arm and the back part of the lower control arm. Again, I am imagining this flipped upside down, if you like. So, we've got that sitting there, rotated in your mind around to where it'll actually sit. Now, when I had those made, or at least when I drew them, they all came off the same drawing. So if we square them here at the back edge, and then we look at the front edge, I mean that's, oh well, you can see that, but you get any more perfect than that. The only problem I had with this part, again, it would have been my drawing, not their issue. It would have been this element here. Again, I understand as I made this, and maybe as you're watching you might start getting confused about a few of these things. The frame curves, right? It comes down to meet this. So there's no chance that we're actually going to be able to use this way. Like, there isn't going to be a flat spot of frame where this lower control arm back position actually sits. But when I drew it up, I always drew it up with the notion that we'd be taking this area here, right, the part that references to the side of the tube, and we're probably going to be cutting off a good chunk of it, right? So we'll be cutting off that to allow it to fit up to the curved section of the rail, because that's where it sits. But in the interim, I have to have something to jig to fit it up to. So I said, well, flat gets me into some position, that's okay. So we can set those into position. We'll clamp them up, set the other pieces in, and then we'll carry on with some of the measurements. Now, to make sure I'm doing this correctly, just using my small and reasonably accurate level here, setting those in. This all becomes kind of tricky to do. So I got to watch to make sure it's perfectly level. And then I clamp it. It always moves just a hair. Okay, so we then clamp that in. So now we're square to the bottom, right? We're square everywhere else. And the surface that we're mounting the control arm holder is actually, it's level, okay? On this other part, we can't do that. All we have on this part, you just slide it back into that corner. We don't have anything at the front edge to square to. Now this is the part of the joy, and I'm just looking for it to touch down. It's got to be in the back, into the corner, and down tight to the frame. So there we go. Happy right there. Now, I'm going to take these assemblies, add them in. They just fit, they fit into that hole pretty nicely. And then I've got my converted car jack, which I use as stage levelers. Play around with this bit here. Okay, so that one's in. We'll add the other one in. Okay, so fundamentally that's going to be the welding jig. We're going to come in and just tack all this stuff in. We're happy with where it is. The only thing I have left to do, which I was going to do with my tape measure. I know it's here somewhere. There it is. Okay, so we'll just quickly take a measure from the front edge of this. And we'll see here that we've got to the front side of that bracket, we're 15 and 13/16, and to the edge of this bracket over here, again being the ones that matter, we are 30 and 7/8. Numbers I do want to see. And again, we are 13/16 here, and get it straight. 7/8 there, 30 and 7/8. It's pretty good, but it's a bit sketchy with things in the way, so I've measured that up. We could set the trammel, I suppose, on it and try, but again, it's kind of hard because we're trying to pick up a corner here, a round corner, but it should work for that too. At any rate, I'm happy with where the square is, and I'm just going to play with the setup a little bit. So one of the things we have to test is how it's going to sit level-wise. So we can have a look here. That's perfect, but not too bad. Okay, so we've got that. That's telling me this is perfectly level here. actually sitting really good there. Now again, I've got to put a cross member between here. Actually, it'll sit somewhere biased slightly towards the front, but not as far as you think. Because remember, the lower control arm bolts to here. There's nothing forward of here. Just engines and other things that I'm sure is going to get in the way, but I gotta put my steering bracket in here. We're going the other way, but so it's actually back quite a ways. And I will be putting some cross bracing in to help things out a little bit here, but that's really all it's going to need. So we then would like to test it here at the back edge. That's spot on. Here at the front edge, I have no issues with that. If I then measure the rod itself for each side, I think we all can agree that's pretty good. All right, if we do it for the other side, again, well, hard to see, but I don't want to get you motion sick. So yeah, that's fine. Those are all. Well, we've come to the end of episode 9 of Throttle Stop Garage. Here we are, just finishing tacking those things up, getting them all put in place. Boy, that was a momentous day when those things actually finished up. So we've checked them for square 8 million times and checked them for level yet again. Anyway, put the tacks on the other side, nothing moved, everything was fine. Alright, we'll see you again in episode 10. Thanks for tuning in and watching, and please like and subscribe.